Okay, so hi everyone, my name's Indy and I've been a business analyst for over 8 years now, currently a senior BA, and over the past 2-3 years we've started up a business called BA BCS Training, where we teach certificates from the BCS International Diploma in Business Analysis. So everything that we'll be recovering today is partly from the requirements engineering one, and I think that's kind of like the most useful one for business analysts because you can use everything from that certificate the next day. So, which is why we'll be going through 11 techniques every BA should have in their toolkit. And I think as a business analyst, you kind of end up looking towards interviews, document analysis, and workshop. But there's a variety more that we can be using to actually uncover those requirements from our different stakeholders. So we'll go through them today. But also, if you've got any questions, feel free to ask away during the presentation. You don't have to wait until the end. Okay, so there's quantitative and qualitative elicitation techniques. So when we're looking at quantitative, so we've got activity sampling, we've got special purpose records and questionnaires. And these are where the data is numerical, it measures frequency and volume, but on its own is not enough to actually get that information from your stakeholders to find out what the why is. So it's great to start it off on, but then we can also use those qualitative ones. But everything on this slide is what we'll be going through today in terms of finding out what the business analyst should be doing and how they should be using it. And then you've got qualitative as well. So we've got interviews, workshops, observation, scenario analysis, document analysis, focus groups, storytelling, and structured walkthroughs. So these are great to kind of find out understand the behavior of your stakeholder, explore the context, and identify any needs, gaps, or risks in that process or within that stakeholder. Okay, so we'll start off with interviews. So these are kind of like a great way to make initial contact with your stakeholder and establish BA basis to create a clear understanding of the scope, objectives, and approach for business analysis work. You can also learn about building rapport with your stakeholder. So I know in many companies that I've worked in, I've known some of the people who I'm interviewing I've not spoken to beforehand. So it's a great way to kind of develop trust and open communication channels. And it's a great point to kind of acquire information and gather critical details about current functions. I always think it's also best practice once I've completed my interview is to kind of write everything up so that it's in sentences and kind of go back to my stakeholder to confirm I've understood everything that we've spoken about. But what we'll also go through is there's some questions that you can also ask your interviewer. So when you're in those interviews, so say, for example, if we're asking about inputs and dependencies, some of the questions you could start off with could be, where do the inputs for this process come from? What information do you need before starting this task? And what happens if an input is delayed or incorrect? The purpose here is to identify upstreams, dependencies, and potential risks. Now, as a business analyst, if we're asking about process timelines and frequencies, you might ask, how often do you perform this process? Is it daily, weekly, or ad hoc? This is quite important. So, for example, if you're looking into a process and you're looking to build a system, it's good to know how often these certain tasks are completed. So how long does each step usually take? And are there any time-sensitive steps or deadlines? Here it reveals timing, any performance constraints, and helps with the process modeling part. Then if we're speaking about or need to understand about communication or handoffs, you want to know, how do you communicate progress or issues during this process? What happens during handoffs between peoples or teams? Now, I've seen quite often that people kind of know the process inside out, but then when they're handing off that process to somebody else, there isn't actually documentation. And that's kind of where the business analyst might come in and have to draw out swim lane diagrams or create some document analysis as well. And are there any delays or errors in these transitions? So this would highlight collaboration issues and opportunities for smoother workflows. Then if you've got any questions around rules, policies, or compliance, that could be, are there any rules or policies you must follow during this process? What happens if those rules are broken or missed? And do you have to report or audit anything as part of this process? The purpose here is to identify any regulatory or business rules that shape that process. And finally, you might ask about system or data issues. So here you want to be thinking about, does the system you use support this process well? Where do errors or data problems typically occur? And do you trust the data you work with? Why or why not? This helps you to uncover technology limitations, data integrity concerns, and potentials for automation. So next we'll have a look at some workshops. So workshops are great to kind of get quite a few different people into a room. Is a group so you could get appropriately knowledgeable and motivated people and moderated by an impartial facilitator, which could be the business analyst, to achieve an agreed objective. So the advantages here, it can be fast, but it also depends on how long that workshop is. I've been in workshops where they've been 7, 8 hours and it felt a bit we didn't actually need that time. So it's kind of being able to control your environment and being able to get the stakeholders involved and committed. You might even have developers and stakeholders, and it's a simple method of resolving some issues. The disadvantages might be it's hard to schedule. There might be some hidden agendas from a variety of different stakeholders that you have in that workshop. So why is a workshop important? So it encourages collaboration, so it brings together diverse stakeholders, and then you can also uncover any hidden requirements and issues, so group discussions, services, assumptions, risks, and dependencies that rarely emerge in one-to-one interviews. You can also improve your requirement qualities as well. So requirements can be challenged, clarified, and refined in real time, reducing ambiguity and strengthening those outcomes. And it enables for efficient decision making as well. So you can question the requirements, conflicts, and priorities are resolved faster through live discussions rather than email. So when can or when should a workshop be used? So it should be used at the beginning of a project to define the scope, objectives, or high-level requirements. It can be used during requirement solicitation when input is needed from multiple stakeholders. For prioritization as well, so to agree on the must-haves versus the nice-to-haves. So using techniques like Moscow, which could be must, the should, the could, and the won't. You could also use it during solution design as well, so to validate business processes and when resolving any conflicts to bring differing opinions into alignment through facilitated discussions. So typical activities a BA should lead or support in a workshop. So icebreakers or introductions could be something the business analyst does. The brainstorming part, so when we're generating ideas. I think process mapping is a great one. So when we're visualizing and validating current or future workflows, I tend to use workshops and as a great way where loads of different stakeholders are in disagreement. I'll draw out a swim lane diagram, put it on the board, and it's a great way for everyone to kind of understand what the process is. And then we can all start working on understanding how we can make that process better. Requirements prioritization. So you can also agree on what's most important during what Moscow. You might use role play or scenario analysis. That's another elicitation technique that we'll go through. We'll understand users' needs in real world context and gap analysis. So understand the as is versus the to be. So then there's also observation as well. So see how work is actually done, not how it's described. And the purpose here is to reveal real processes and workarounds and expose those inefficiencies and gaps and validate interview findings. Now, there's 3 different ways of observation. So you've got formal observation, which is structured and planned. So this is where the business analyst observes with a specific goal and often takes notes or records data. You might have informal observations, it's less structured. You might wander into the department and you might casually actually visit casually note down other activities. And then you've got shadowing as well, which is a form of close real-time observation where the business analyst follows a user throughout their tasks. So when would you use observation? You might use it when users are struggling to articulate their process, when real behavior differs from documented procedures, when assessing system usability or interface interaction, or in highly manual operational environments. So what's the role of the business analyst during observation? You're here to plan what to observe and define the objectives. You want to look for inefficiencies, pain points, or any undocumented steps. So you might have used document analysis before you've actually got to observation. You might take structured notes or use an observation checklist, and you'll ask clarifying questions if appropriate. So we'll have a look at some scenarios. So a scenario for a formal observation could be you're observing call center agents handling customer service queries, and the business analyst watches 3 agents over 2 hours. They'll note how long each call takes, how systems are used, and what steps are skipped or done manually. It aims to gather data on how agents interact with that specific CRM. So it's useful for process improvement, system interface redesign, and time and motion studies. If we're looking at informal observation, so the scenario could be while visiting the finance team to interview the manager, the BA notices how employees pass paper invoices between desks. The business analyst might make mental notes and later ask clarifying questions and discovers that a manual step exists that's undocumented and prone to errors. It's quite useful for identifying unspoken practices, hidden inefficiencies, and culture or team dynamics. And then finally, shadowing. So this could be the business analyst shadows a warehouse picker from start to end of their shift, follows them through scanning items, handling errors, and managing inventory. They'll observe physical work environments, tool use, and informal communications with their supervisors. And in some cases, the BA might ask questions during quiet periods or after tasks. It's useful for end-to-end processes, understanding, especially in operational or customer-facing roles. And then we've got scenario analysis. So this is where we've created our requirements and we want to know what those what-if scenarios are. So it's a technique used to explore how a system, process, or user interaction unfolds in any given situation. So it involves constructing detailed narratives based on those real or hypothetical events to understand what the user does and how that system might respond. So the purpose of scenario analysis is to reveal real-world behavior, to understand those exception cases or those edge cases, aid in validation of your requirements by checking if they support practical user situations. And if a requirement doesn't survive a scenario, it's not actually ready. We need to go back and uncover more information. So there are different scenarios. We might have heard of the happy path, which is normal, which is the complete flow in its state as it is. You might get alternative. So this is where we show different ways that the process could happen, or you might have the exception / the negative. So this is describing what happens when something goes wrong or doesn't follow the usual flow. So when to use it and what your role as the business analyst is. So you could use it to clarify how the system should behave in real situations, to explore the what-if cases in workshops or interviews or when we're understanding what that system should behave, and to validate our use cases, processes, and acceptance criteria. So the business analyst here should be identifying and shaping realistic user scenarios. So you're coming up with those what-if cases, work with the stakeholders to validate them, and use those scenarios to expose edge cases, rules, and non-functional needs. So we'll talk about some scenarios. So if we're looking at a happy path, again, this could be like use case descriptions. The scenario might be a customer purchases a product online and the trigger is customer selects buy now. The steps are they enter payment details, confirms order, and receives email confirmation. The outcome here is the successful order and it was dispatched. The purpose here is to identify those core functional requirements for online ordering and confirmation. The second scenario could be the alternative one. So this is where a customer checks out as a guest instead of creating an account. So the trigger here is the customer chooses checkout as guest, and the steps are they enter shipping details, enters card info, and places the order. The outcome here is order completed without account registration. The purpose here is to explore how flexibility in user's journey is handled, example, no saved preferences. And finally, the exception scenario. So this could be the customer's payment fails due to incorrect CVV. The trigger is the payment attempt fails. The steps are error message displayed and customer re-enters card details. The outcome here is payment succeeds or order cancels after a certain amount of retries. The purpose here is to identify error handling, retry logic, security messaging, and logging those requirements. And then we have document analysis. So this is a really good one to use when you're even when you're starting off in a new company as a business analyst. I've used it time and time again to understand how the company works, what projects they've worked on, how they currently do things, whether it's agile or waterfall. So it's a good technique to review and extract relevant information from existing written materials such as reports, manuals, policy documents, system specs, or logs. So when can we use this? Could be used early in the project to gain background understanding, when stakeholders refer to existing policies or procedures, as part of gap analysis to understand the as is versus the to be, to uncover any legacy systems before systems replacement, and when validating stakeholders' input, or even preparing for interviews and workshops. So different scenarios you can use document analysis could be the BA reviews legacy system specs and user manuals before interviewing their stakeholders. They might even discover a list of features users still rely on that weren't actually documented in recent discussions. The outcome here is that these are carried forward into requirements for the new system. Or you could be a business analyst analyzing those government regulations and company policies for a process automation project. You would identify that any automation must include an auditable approval step. And the outcome here could be this is documented as a non-negotiable business rule in the requirements. Then you've got focus groups as well. So a focus group is kind of like a facilitated discussion involving a selected group of stakeholders. You kind of want around 6 to 12 participants potentially to understand their views, expectations, or experiences around a business issue, product, or solution. The aim is to gather qualitative insight through group interaction. The purpose here is to explore requirements, expectations, or problems from multiple stakeholders, to test their reactions or ideas, prototypes, or proposed changes, identify those common themes or potential areas of conflicts, and help prioritize features or understand customers' uses or needs. So when can or should a BA use focus group? When there's a broad perspective is needed quickly from multiple stakeholders, during the early phases of a project for exploratory requirements gathering, when testing stakeholder reactions to wireframes, mock-ups, prototypes, or new processes, and to identify those diverse views, especially where groups may be affected differently. And then we've also got storytelling, which is a little different from interviews. So storytelling uses structured narratives to understand how people experience a process or system, revealing those needs, frustrations, and workarounds. And when should a business analyst use storytelling? So maybe you could use it during early stages of requirement solicitation, right, especially with non-technical stakeholders, when stakeholders struggle to articulate needs in formal terms, and to uncover those user perspectives that would be missed in process diagrams or checklists, and when designing those customer experiences or mapping the user journeys. So there's a variety of different types of storytelling that you might not have noticed before. You might have personal experience stories, so users or stakeholders describing how they currently perform tasks. You might have future state stories, stakeholders describing how they would like things to work, helping define ideal outcomes. You've got user stories if you're using agile methodology, so it's that short statement where we're thinking about, as a user, I want so that. And you might have the customer journey narratives, describing end-to-end experiences from the customer's point of view across multiple touch points. So scenarios of these could be when you're trying to understand call center frustrations. So a call center agent shares a story about a difficult call involving multiple systems and delays, reveals that switching screens adds 20 plus seconds per call and frustrates the customer. Then the business analyst might recommend interface redesign and process streamlining. Or you could have future state storytelling, which is where a department manager describes how they'd like to onboard new staff more easily, and they envision a centralized portal with automated workflows and welcome messages. Here, the business analyst could capture this as a set of high-level requirements for a digital onboarding system. And then you've got structured walkthroughs. So this is where, once we've collected all those requirements, it's a facilitated review where stakeholders would validate the accuracy, clarity, and completeness of your requirements or your models. So the purpose here is to ensure that documentation, so that requirements, processes are clear, complete, and correct. You'd identify your errors, your gaps, or your ambiguities early, and validate understanding across business and technical teams. So when should a business analyst use a structured walkthrough? So after preparing key deliverables such as requirements documents, process maps, wireframes, or prototypes, and before handing off requirements to development or testing teams, and during a quality assurance stage to reduce rework later and to support stakeholder engagement and build consensus. So different scenarios for structured walkthrough could be that the business analyst presents a draft functional requirements document to business stakeholders and developers. The stakeholder clarifies business rules, developers flag technical constraints. The outcome here is that document is revised and signed off, reducing rework during development. Or you could be through a process map walkthrough. So a business analyst shares a 2B process diagram with operations and compliance teams. The compliance lead identifies missing approval steps. The outcome here is the process is updated to include regulatory checkpoints before implementation. And then you've also got activity sampling. So this is where the elicitation technique is used to gather data about how people spend their time or perform tasks. So this technique involves observing and recording a person's activities at random intervals over a specific period. It can provide useful information about how people spend their time, how long they spend on specific tasks, and how they prioritize their activities. This is kind of an example here on the side that kind of says that someone might be doing direct work at this time, they might be doing civil work at this time, and it might be material handling at that time. It kind of gives you an idea on currently what that process is currently. So the purpose of activity sampling is to quantify how often certain activities occur, to identify how much time is spent on productive versus non-productive work, understand work patterns and uncover hidden inefficiencies, and provide evidence for process redesign or automation opportunities. Again, activity sampling can be kind of used when you're doing observation as well. So when to use it and what's your role as a business analyst? So you want to use it when there is a need to quantify how time is spent, especially in manual or repetitive environments, when managers or users cannot accurately describe their daily activity patterns, and as part of a feasibility study or business case. And then the business analyst role in activity sampling is to define the objective, the target group, and the sampling approach. You want to collect and analyze time, use data to identify your patterns, and to present insights and recommend improvements or automation. So different scenarios here could be that the BA records that what five agents are doing every 15 minutes for 3 days. The result might be that the 60% on calls, 25% in systems updating records, and 15% is idle or admin. The outcome here is that the BA might recommend process automation for data entry to increase call handling capacity. You've got scenario 2, which is warehouse staff observation. So observes one picker for a full shift, logs every action. So we're thinking about scanning, walking, waiting, system usage. The results are 30% of time is spent walking between shelves, and the outcome might even be they suggest redesigning the layout or using handheld route optimization tools. And then we have special purpose records. So this is where they're custom designed forms or logs used by employees to record specific information about their activities, transactions, or process steps over a period of time. So unlike activity sampling where the observer collects data, in this technique, the individuals themselves would record the data. So this is where they would capture detailed, structured data about tasks, activities, or issues over time. You'd understand your frequency, volume, durations, or problems with certain activities, and you'd enable data collection without needing the BA to be present, and you'd support evidence-based decisions in process improvement, workflow design, or system automation. So this could be where the staff record start end time of activities to identify task durations. You could have error or issue logs, so records of fault, rework, system downtime, or process failures. You could even ask for volume records, so this is logs showing how many times tasks or requests are handled in a time period. You could look at interrupt logs, so this is where you're tracking disruptions or delays, so when does the system crash, what are the customers' queries. You could even look at workflow tracking sheets, so how staff document each step of a process or case they handle. So when can or should a BA use special purpose records? When quantitative evidence is needed to support a business case or root cause analysis, when staff can easily track data themselves, when direct observation is impractical or would disrupt the process, to identify patterns in errors, delays, workloads, or inefficiencies, and to support time and motion studies or justify system upgrades or staff changes. So certain scenarios could be when we're looking at, so the purpose could be to find out how much time is spent on different case types. So staff record start and end times for each activity over 5 days. The findings could be 35% of time spent on admin tasks, and the outcome might be the BA recommends introducing document automation tools. Or you could have volume record in customer services. So here's the staff record number of calls and email queries handled each hour. The findings are that email spikes during lunch hours or call volume stable. The outcome could be the adjust staffing patterns for better coverage. And then finally, questionnaires. So a questionnaire is a structured set of questions used to efficiently gather opinions, behaviors, or requirements. The purpose here is to collect quantitative or even qualitative data from a broad audience and to identify common trends, opinions, or satisfaction levels. You want to gather input from your stakeholders who are geographically dispersed and complement other elicitation techniques such as interviews or workshops. So when should you use it and what's the role of the business analyst? So it's best to use when needing input from many stakeholders in a short space of time to quantify opinions, validate assumptions, or even identify those patterns. And in the early stages of analysis to identify issues or prioritize the needs. And the role of the business analyst to define the objective of the questionnaire, what insight is needed and why. You want to design the questions that are clear, unbiased, and focus on your outcomes. You want to be able to collect, analyze, and interpret responses to identify trends, themes, or concerns. So certain scenarios we might use questionnaires could be a BA sends a questionnaire to 100 employees across departments to rank system pain points. You could use Likert scales and ranking questions. The outcome here is you've identified top 3 frustrations used to inform system upgrade priorities. You could even have it as a post-workshop feedback. So BA distributes a feedback form after a requirements workshop, includes open questions such as what was unclear and ratings on session effectiveness. The outcome here is it helps improve future sessions and identifies areas needing clarification. Okay, that was all the 11 techniques that we've gone through today. If there's any questions, please feel free to ask, and it might be good to see if you might have used some of these, but you've not realized that you've used those were the actual techniques that you've used in the past.
Indeed, as a layman, I have an insane number of questions. Some other people might go, why are you asking that? This seems like a lot of information to retain. So after 8 years of being a BA, is this instinctive for you now as to which technique you use, or do you have some kind of reference checklist that you go to and go, this is the scenario, this is the type of stakeholder I'm working with, like this is the technique I'm going to use today?
I think it depends on the process because I've used a variety of these over the years now. So I've used observation. So I've used observation once when a team were kind of holding on to their processes, and the team they were kind of worried about business change, and they were worried if they had someone come into their department, they might be out of a job or something because everything was admin. So I think it's become instinctive over the years, but I know at the beginning it was definitely kind of looking through these techniques and understanding when to use and why to use each one. And which is why I've kind of created this and happy to share it along as well, so that you can kind of go, okay, at what stage should I use this and why should I use it? But it's become instinctive over the years now.
Yeah. Do you find that certain techniques work better with different levels of stakeholder? And is it dependent upon the kind of responsibility you've been given in terms of how much time you've got with that stakeholder?
Yes, yeah, definitely. So I always think workshops and interviews end up always becoming the first one that I end up using, and I tend to use the other ones in the with those ones. So it really depends on like what that process is, who that person is that I'm talking to. So like if I want a lot of people like opinions, or we want to talk about some requirements, I'll get a workshop done. But if I've got time and I can spend time, I'll use activity sampling with observation. Or I usually end up starting off with document analysis because it ends up giving me some information on what's already happened. So I don't want to be asking those questions that previously could have been answered from like reading some documents or reading some processes or some swim lane diagrams that have already been created.
And then the third part of my question is very closely aligned to a question that Craig's asked in the chat.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask, are there certain techniques that you would put into, this works best in person, this is best to use if you're remote? Craig's asked a similar question, but he said, in today's world, the majority of BAs are actually remote working.
Yes.
And even if you are in an office, you're probably working with disparate teams that aren't in the same office as you. How do you best apply the techniques you've mentioned without being physically in person with somebody?
So I think that always starts off with, so I know trying to do any observation or activity sampling is very difficult if you're remote working. But I think in terms of everything else, you can kind of employ this. So like think about a structured walkthrough. So once you've collected all your requirements techniques, I think that's always a good one to try and get maybe a developer involved or your key stakeholders to go through all your requirements in detail. you can still do document analysis, questionnaires, you can do interviews, workshops. I think the only ones that you'd probably struggle on is the observation and activity sampling, but the rest, I think, with especially with teams and everything involved, you can kind of get those people involved to kind of go through those elicitation techniques.
Nice, thank you. This is a
Okay.
question for the room, I guess. So
Mhm.
Indy's shared with you a lot of techniques. Some of them might be new to you, some of them might be things that you have tried to do before. Uh, are there any challenges that you've had trying to use any of these techniques in the past that you want to share and get any advice on? So, like you've set out questionnaires and got no responses, or you've run a workshop and it's not giving you the outcome you're looking for. Um, Anybody want to share anything that they're thinking be good to get the room's advice on?
I think sometimes it can be tricky to get stakeholder buy-in. So I've probably done things that would be similar to like workshops or focus groups in the past, like you mentioned early on in the
Mhm.
process, to try and gather those initial requirements and understand kind of the root cause of the problem.
Yeah.
A little bit like you mentioned when you'd worked with a team where they were a bit reluctant to any changes to
Mhm.
processes. So what would you recommend in terms of trying to improve that buy-in from stakeholders?
I think it depends on how you're working on because I've definitely experienced that in the past where we've tried to get buy-in from a variety of different stakeholders. And I think it ends up being as a business analyst, from my point of view anyways, is having those conversations one-on-one rather than because I know at the beginning I would send out an email inviting everyone to a workshop and get people who weren't interested in that workshop because for them they weren't close enough to the project at the time, even though I needed their information or their input. So I think it always, from my point of view, anyways, I've always had those one-on-one conversations to understand what their pain points are or what that buy-in should be. So what are they interested in currently? Why do I need them into that workshop? What's my reasoning for it? What's their reasoning? And trying to bridge that gap together. And I think it ends up being those conversations that have helped me kind of move, maybe having that interview with that person or having that workshop with that person or trying to get those questionnaires across, but it ends up being conversation. That's really helped me. I don't know if that's a bit vague, but
Yeah, so I guess it sounds like you're saying to try and help them understand why
yeah,
their input is valuable and it's
yes.
them specifically that you need to talk to. Yeah, thank you.
It's all right.
Any more questions? Sherma, go for it.
Yes,
Okay.
my question is, have you had to like change a particular technique midway in the project? Maybe you started with one and then as the project progresses, you kind of realize, oh, it could have been better with the other technique. Did you then maybe switch or you just stick to what you already working with?
I think it depends on what stage you are in the project, because I know I've always started off with kind of like, say if I start off with a project and I've not don't know anything about it, I start with document analysis. But if I realize something's not working on, I think it's okay to kind of move on and use something else. So I guess in the past we've used workshops before and we tried to get a range of different stakeholders. I worked in this company before where it's a kind of a franchise and we had differing views and certain people coming into that workshop to kind of force their opinion forward, whereas listening to everyone else. So I think it's trying to understand, okay, maybe let's not have that specific person in that workshop next time. And then try and get those views together and maybe speak to that person separately and try and understand what their view is on maybe that project that you're working towards. But I think using a range of those kind of gets you to understand stakeholders' buy-in, what their views are, what they're interested in, and trying to uncover those requirements so that you can start building out whether it's that process or that project that you're working on.
Does that answer your question, Sherma?
Yes, thank you very much.
Lovely. Anybody else? Oh, Jessie's back.
Hello, me again. I just wondered, for each of these techniques, do you have or have you developed over time a standardized way that you collect the outcome of any of these techniques, or is it more like project specific and dependent on what you're working on? Like, do you, for example, have a template that you would fill in after a workshop to capture all the evidence, or is it dependent on what you've discussed?
I think it ends up being dependent on what we've discussed. I know my go-to is usually trying to depends on what we're talking about. So I guess if it's a process, I always try to draw out a swim lane diagram. It's one of my preferred options, but I know that doesn't work for every single one. So if you've got questionnaires or anything like that. And I think it just depends. I don't exactly have a template, I guess, in terms of how I'd go through each one and how I'd collect everything, but maybe that could be something else that I work towards and kind of share that across with everyone. If I could put something together then and help that out.
Thank you.
Indy,
Yes.
how has AI impacted your job in terms of capturing requirements and maybe even getting requirements from an AI agent instead of from a human?
I think so currently I work in a company which is kind of like automotive based. So I don't think AI has impacted my job in terms of like finding out business analysis because I've still got to go out and speak to my stakeholders, whether they're dispersed in like Europe or whether they're across England or something. So I think it still has that human impact that you need where you're having those conversations. And in terms of maybe AI, I guess. I know I've heard a bit of chat about in terms of like creating those swim lane diagrams or your process diagrams, being able to put your requirements into something like that, and it might have created something for you. But I think from my point of view, I think it's always better if you kind of created something yourself. So from my experience, I don't think AI has affected my job currently, or I don't see it, I guess, because as a BA, I don't see how AI would go out and have those conversations with different people. It might help you create like maybe a questionnaire, or it might help you build out some interview questions or something. But at the end of the day, I think you've still got to go out and speak to those people and then still be that person. Because I think as a business analyst, you kind of bridge the gap between the business and the customers.
Yeah. And my question was prompted, I guess, by Jesse's request, ask about how you capture those outcomes. And is anybody on the call successfully using AI? So even if it's Copilot or something more bespoke to capture the outcomes of the conversations you are having as a human, but then help you to summarize that and present that back to development teams or whatever. Anybody having any success with AI bots and things in that regard? Pamela.
Yes, in my experience, and it's very focused on my last experience. I noticed very success that the people successfully accept my proposal on workshops, trying to make brainstorm sessions using AI. But I noticed some hesitation with other groups within the same company. And the difference was that the people that were fully interested in using AI were very young. And people that are more experienced that already have a grasp in how to formulate questions or how to start a brainstorming session on the classic or on a structured basis, they don't think we do need to add AI to the sessions, but in contrast, the young people are very interested in working with AI in kind of workshops or brainstorming, from my experience.
Okay.
Any replies to that, Indy, before I move on?
Yeah, I think it'd be great to see how AI we could use it in like maybe workshops or something, but I've not seen any tools that have been, I guess, good enough for me to go, okay, I think it's a great one for us to kind of start creating in terms of like swim lane diagrams or anything like that, but unless somebody else has.
Cool. Well, that might be a question we post in the online space to say, has anybody got any good use cases for AI to help the BA role? Question from Gail, which feeds into where I was going to take this anyway. So, Indy, you do deliver BA training,
Yes.
and Gail has asked about any formal qualifications that you might recommend or any training that's available to cover the content you've gone through today. Do you want to answer that question and tell us about any kind of call to action if anybody wants to follow up with you personally?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so what we've gone through today is over, so I don't know if you've heard about the BCS International Diploma in Business Analysis. So I think one of the great certificates I always speak to students is the requirements engineering one. It's one of the core certificates that you need to complete for the diploma. But I think after you completed that one, you can use those techniques that you're learning from those. So But what we've covered today is basically kind of like quarter of what kind of that goes through. We'd go through a lot more in detail if you're doing the practitioner certificate in requirements engineering. But I think that's always a good one for business analysts to then start understanding, okay, what's a functional requirement, non-functional requirement? You want to learn about technical or general. If you want to learn about how to kind of draw out those swim lane diagrams, use case diagrams, descriptions, learn about class models, learn about more about your stakeholders. And then, like, yeah, so we teach that, and you can find me on LinkedIn, and then we teach those certificates basically. It's over a 2-day period, which we teach them even on weekends. So this could be like a Saturday, Sunday, and then you'd be able to complete your exam then afterwards. But we also kind of differentiate ourselves. So if you want like BA lifetime mentorship, it's kind of free as part of that package. So if you want any assistance in terms of like, you want to talk to me about anything business analysis related, you're interested in like a project that you're stuck on, you want some senior BA advice or something like that, or anything like that, it kind of incorporates all of it into one.